Okay, if you will, we'll open with a prayer. If you'd bow with me, please. Father, we do thank you for this day. We thank you for the blessings. We thank you for this beautiful weather that you've sent this way this time of the year, Lord. We enjoy it so much. Thank you for our city, and thank you for our citizens and their passion for what all is right and what all we can do to make it a better place. Father, I ask all these in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
Call the meeting to order. If you'll rise for the pledge, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, next on the agenda is open forum. I'm assuming we don't have anyone requesting for open forum. Okay, so we'll move on. And then we will move to our consent agenda. Are there any items to be removed from the consent agenda, Council? I'm assuming your silence means none. Do I have a motion to approve the consent agenda?
Make a motion we approve the consent agenda.
Okay, do I have a second?
Second.
All right, thank you. Okay, any further discussion? Those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, same sign. All right. That was pretty quick. Right, we'll move to the regular agenda. Receive a presentation from the Massey Rose Foundation regarding the Old Town Rig Down held September 16th and 17th, 2022 in downtown Nacogdoches.
Hi,
How
my
are you?
name is Sherry Morgan, and I'm the Executive Director for the Convention and Visitors Bureau here in Nacogdoches. On September 16th through the 17th of this year, we were able to welcome a new event into our brick streets of downtown. It was an unknown variable that worked very much in our favor. Incredibly popular event, practically filled up every bed space in hotels, combined with a few youth sports events that were going on that weekend as well. The estimated economic impact from that day and a half event was in excess of $331,000, and that's not including the very generous and benevolent contributions made by Massey Rose Foundation to some local nonprofit groups. That was around $200,000. So if you factor that all together, it puts you well above $500,000 flowing through our community. Wouldn't have been possible, I will say, from an event, making sure the execution of the event went well, and the planning phases with the gentleman you're about to hear with. They are by far at the top of our list of people that were engaged in what needed to be done, boots on the ground. They were a dream to work with. They had very realistic expectations, and if every event host could be like them, we would be blessed and highly favored. It is my pleasure and my honor to introduce Troy Massey and Stephen Molander.
We would really rather hear from Abby.
Yeah.
Abby. No, she's not coming up here, I can tell you.
I know
You can
that.
get her up here, then by all means do it.
First off, January 4th of this year, 10 months ago, I guess, 10 months ago, we stood up here and we made the pledge that if you allowed us to have this event, step out, into what she said was an unknown variable. I think it was a list of unknown variables, and I think we were as concerned with the outcome, the support, the generosity of all the businesses and people that we knew for donations and things like that. There were a tremendous amount of unknown variables on our side too. I think when we stood up here and we asked for your permission to have this event and the city to support the event, I made the pledge myself for Abby and myself that if we were allowed to have this event, we chose one program, the old university building restoration project. which needed about $60,000 to finish, the budget so that they could commence the restoration. So I told you guys if you allowed me to have this event for our team, I told you that if we didn't raise $1, that Abby and I would come out of our pocket, and luckily we didn't have to do that. So the good news is the short story.
That's not possible.
The short story is not only did it, and I know it's a long process of approving and tons and tons of meetings and planning with you guys and a lot of other people with the city to make the event possible. During that time, we went out to everyone that we know, everyone that we do business with, every person that we came across, and asked for donations to give to the old university building. So the good news is that after a while, we reached that goal, and we needed a second target, so we chose the Boys and Girls Club. This particular Boys and Girls Club, and I know every city is a little bit different, but for ours, this city is very special to me. I love this city. So my wife went to this Boys and Girls Club as a young child, and so this Boys and Girls Club was special to me because it took care of her when her family needed it. So we asked them what they needed, and we set ourselves a goal, and we made that goal. So we're rocking along, and we needed a third place to give away some money. And so I went to my wife and I said, you haven't had your choice. I kind of chose second for you. The city helped us to choose number one. So she wanted to help out the animal shelter. She's a huge animal lover. If anybody knows Abby, she loves some animals more than humans. I'm telling you right now, Mayor, she loves animals more than humans. I'm telling you, sorry. So we reached out with your help, Mayor. You put us in contact with the appropriate person at the animal shelter, and Abby, and she worked out what it was that the shelter needed. Told us how much it was. We kind of upsized that number by double, I believe. And we said, this is going to be our budget. So we're set off and we collect more money. And we continue collecting. And guess what? We met that goal. So here we are probably 6 weeks before the show. So we're faced with a situation where we had to come to you again. And I didn't know the correct person to talk to, but my son went to Christ Episcopal School, and they always need help. They have no state funding, I don't think. Do they have any state funding? So you put us in touch with the correct person at the Christ Episcopal School. I do think that that's where my son, who was a tough young man to raise, but I think that place gave him the roots that he needed to become a good man that he has become. He's 19 years old now. He's attending Stephen F. Austin. He'll after this semester he'll be a sophomore. Super proud of him. And I got in good contact with the Christ Episcopal School and figured out what they needed to up their security and help out the kids there. And so that finished off our 4 places to kind of bless. And so we achieved all our goals. The event went off, in my opinion. I don't think we could have done better for a first-year event. We've got a couple of, Mario and his team and my team, we met yesterday. It's a tough question when he says, what would you do for next year? Because, I have to do better, and so that's a really tough question. It's a tough question to answer yesterday, but we thought of a few things, and so we are planning again for the following year, start this whole process back over again, and really without you guys approving this deal, and it was kind of tough because we were kind of coming out of COVID, and a lot of you, was not face to face yet. I remember there was a couple of you that videoed in because of COVID, and it seems like it was a little bit more of a difficult time. But all in all, the event went good. I know we had 91% hotel occupancy. We met with the I don't want to give all the stuff away. I want to give him at least 3 minutes to talk.
I told y'all there's no shortage.
But we met with all the downtown merchants. Some of the comments made back to us were, not an exact quote, but pretty close. Some of the downtown merchants here said that they sold more product in 2 days than they had sold in 3 months. Another comment that we had gotten back to us was that this event helped them get back into the black from COVID. That comment was echoed multiple times. So that was my goal. My goal was not to donate $220,000 to people that needed the money. I'm glad that we did, but my goal was to help the businesses. I told you when I stood here the very first time that this brick street has always been special to me. So I wanted to have the event here so that we could help the people that own businesses on this street. The county, and the city and the county too. But the people that struggle through doing business when they're competing against Amazon. And so my most proud moment of standing here today is saying that we accomplished our goal in helping these businesses right here on this brick street. So I would like to introduce Stephen. He gets 90 seconds. That's all he gets. But without Stephen Molanders, this event, I'm going to say it wouldn't have been possible because
He just don't want to give you that credit. Go ahead.
But Stephen did 95% of the legwork with you guys while I was doing my day job. So go ahead, pat yourself on the back a little bit.
No, I just, this is weird, by the way. This is odd to me. I feel like I'm being rude, not talking, looking back here. I know. I just want to say, being born and raised in Nacogdoches, I grew up on Home Avenue, and it wasn't the greatest neighborhood. It wasn't the greatest, most, economically blessed street to grow up on. Through life, I've done quite a bit of things that were pretty cool, but I've got to say, and I'll keep it short and sweet. To me, I'm 40 years old. This was the biggest and the most proud moment for me to be able to impact the community of Nacogdoches like this. Coming from where I come from, I never would have thought, for one, I'd be standing here. When we presented this, I've known Bill Kennedy since I was a kid, and he said, I never in my life thought I'd see you standing in a city hall meeting. I said, yeah, me neither. But this was, it was a lot of work. It was a lot of stress and tension on all of our relationships with the day-to-days and trying to keep everything good. And things got rough, things got rocky, and then the event hit, and we just kept the wheels rolling and did what we had to do. And there was a couple of moments in that, and during the event was, not a pat on the back, but, a sense and feeling of achievement, and then we donated the money, and my daughter currently goes to the Boys and Girls Club. She actually goes to the gymnastics program. She's on the team and stuff, so a little different than the day-to-day, but this, I wouldn't have been able to even be in this position had Troy and Abby and all the work that they've done to get where they've gotten with the company to and let us get out and experience these truck shows to bring something like this to Nacogdoches. So this was a very, very proud accomplishment and goal in my life, and I appreciate it and thank y'all for letting us do it here.
Thank you. I tell you, I think you did three things really well. Certainly, you communicated well with the different people that you worked with, as Sherry had said earlier. I think one of the biggest thing was that you communicated with the downtown businesses and you tried to make them a part of this. And then the third thing is you just invited a great group of people to our community.
Thank you.
So that's great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Do we do that, or do we accept that? We'll do the proclamation first, okay? Absolutely. Let me read the proclamation to you. Whereas the Massey Rose Foundation was created by Troy and Abby Massey with the intention to organize an event that gives back to the Nacogdoches community, and whereas this year's event was the Old Town Rig Down, which was held September 16th, 17th, 2022 in downtown Nacogdoches and includes vendors, food, concerts, live auction, big rig light show, and much, much more. Whereas the money raised by the Massey Rose Foundation this year will benefit the old university building, the animal shelter, the Boys and Girls Club, and Christ Episcopal School. Whereas through their dedication and hard work, the Massey Rose Foundation has made a tremendous difference in Nacogdoches. Now, therefore, be it proclaimed that I, Jimmy Mize, Mayor of the City of Nacogdoches, and on behalf of the City Council, do hereby extend our heartfelt appreciation to the Massey Rose Foundation. And if you will, do you want to have a picture made?
I think they are requiring Abby to be in this.
I like that.
Mayor, can we also get the some of the benefactors too from that to come up and be in the picture?
Do you need us?
No, after you.
I got room, I can get you all. Mr. Bolden, I can't see you back there. Stand up. All right, are we ready? Here we go. One more.
Betty, did you want to say something?
Yes, I did. Troy, don't leave.
I'm not surprised.
Oh, you know I've got to talk. I have to tell you, Troy, when you decided you were going to put big trucks on the street, most of us women really didn't realize what you meant by that. Those are some big trucks, okay? I got in one that I think might be half as large as my house, okay? But the women at the old university building, the Federation of Women's Clubs, about 600 women, were thrilled when you said the first $50,000 would go to us. But that night when you handed me that check, some of the people with me thought I hadn't seen the check, and I thought, what are you asking me about the check? Is it not $50,000? And then I took a look at it and saw it was 70, and I came unglued. You do not know how much we appreciate that. I want to tell you that the pit has been dug for the elevator. And it is, I would say, I measured, you know me, I got 6 foot by 6 foot by 5 feet deep. It is a big pit, okay? And thanks to you, it's being built. And the women, I have some here, who's with me? Sharon Bradbury, on our renovation, our chairman for that, is with me. And they've sent some goodies for you and your crew, okay? Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
So I have to tell you a quick funny story because Betty was up there and stuff like that, and I know Troy and made the commitment of $50,000, and then when Betty went up, she got $70,000. So I know we were kind of one of the second charities. So when I was up there and they had a check for us for $25,000, and Steve goes, "Oh, we made a mistake on the check," and I'm thinking, okay, Betty was supposed to get 50, she got 70. We're going from 25 down to 5, And I figured, that's still fine. We appreciate anything that you would do. So I figured, okay, we're going to get 5. That's great. And then he goes, no, we made it, and they made it 50. I mean, my heart just sank, and I can't tell you how much we appreciate what you're giving to us. And we spoke that night. We make ends meet. We reach our operating budget every year and stuff like that. But some of the capital improvements that we want to do in the club. I mean, Steve, we're going to replace all those blocks in the pits, where there's some security doors that we've been wanting to put in. We had Stonewater Roofing come out and look at some of the roofs or some of the holes that we have. Some of those things that we can't afford to do, now we're able to do. We really want to thank you for that. So we got a thank you card from our kids. So there's some of the activities that we do, but we appreciate it, all in the council. So, but we appreciate what you did. Thank you so much. Thank you.
And
here empty-handed, I should have brought you a pumpkin because I just unloaded 2,000 pumpkins. Oh my gosh, I think there were more than 2,000 pumpkins. But Troy, when you called, I was just so thrilled. And a lot of people have misconceptions about private schools. Our tuition does not cover our teacher salaries. That's why we have our auction every year. So we are always doing fundraisers to help make ends meet as well. And Cade, I remember Cade when I was on the school board. So that was before I was head of school. No, we loved him. I mean, you got to support and love your children. So, but really, Christ Episcopal School is an extremely important place in this community. It's been around for 75 years. I went there when my father moved here and started teaching at Stephen F. Austin, so I've come full circle. I grew up here, spent the night at Miss Shin's house all the time with Jane Ann, and went to high school with Scott Weems. And so I just want to thank Jimmy Mize, Mayor Jimmy Mize, for thinking of us because, like I said, a lot of misconceptions about private schools. And because of your donation, I had met with Bill Kennedy this summer, and he did an initial site assessment for security. And so our facilities and safety task force is met, and we're prioritizing all of our needs. And we are going to definitely improve our safety at the school, and that's important, especially after all the things that are happening in this world. So we cannot thank you enough, and give Kate a big hug.
So y'all can be seated. We do have one more thing related. We'll move on to 6B. Consider acceptance of a donation in the amount of $50,000 from the Massey Rose Foundation to the Nacogdoches Animal Shelter.
All right, thank you. I did just want to let Steve and Troy know they can come by and pick up their free puppies tomorrow afternoon at the shelter. So just come by. We'll waive the fee. It'll be great. I'm just kidding. So this is a budget amendment to formally accept the donation from the Massey Foundation. These funds will be used for much-needed security improvements at the shelter, and we are very thankful for that donation. And I'm here for any questions from the council.
Do I have a motion?
All right.
That ought to be a tough one.
So move
Yes.
that we
Thank you.
accept
Do I
this.
have a second, Chad?
Just
All
want-
right.
I do want to make a comment.
Sure.
I had a number of people that were sending me messages about how much they enjoyed this event, and then I said, "But did you know that they raised money and donated it to a number of our local charities?" And they said, "No. How much was it?" And I told them, and they were just flabbergasted at the generosity. And I can't thank you enough. It's huge for all of these, and I'm so glad that the council had the foresight to see that this was going to be a good event. So thank y'all very much.
Everybody else okay? Motion second. Those in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, same sign. All right, we'll move on. Thank you again for all you do. We look forward to next year. Is there a date?
No, we've got to still try to schedule and make sure that we're on a bye week with SFA.
Sure.
Hopefully we can get the same month.
Yeah.
Just keep it consistent.
Great. Well, thank you again.
Thank y'all.
Okay, we'll move to 6C, public hearing. Consider a request for a specific use permit to operate a piercing studio in a B2 general business district on Lot 16A, Block 67 of the North Heights Addition subdivision located at 3500 North Street, Suite 10. This request has been made by Primal Piercing and Jewelry, case number SUP 2022-05. City Planner.
All right, thank you, Mayor. Elena Helton, City Planner. This is the location of an existing jewelry store called Primal Piercing and Jewelry. The applicant, Grant Menzies, has proposed to include body piercing as part of their business model. This is a tent space that's approximately 1,200 square feet in size, and they're proposing the hours of operation for the piercing services to be Wednesday through Sunday, 2 p.m. through 9 p.m. Again, the property is zoned B2 general business. This district does allow piercing studios by right with a specific use permit to allow staff, the commission, and council to review these types of requests and then impose any conditions if necessary. The property is adjacent to a general business. It's part of an existing shopping center that was built back in the 80s and 90s. It does abut single family to the north and east. And then right across the street, across Lakewood, is an apartment complex, and then there's some additional commercial development along North Street. These are some images of the storefront, and so there are no exterior improvements proposed with this specific use permit. They'll utilize the existing parking, and essentially it was just an interior finish out. And so all of the improvements that you see will remain the same. The only change will be what's going on inside the building. These are just some additional photos of the rest of the shopping center and the parking lot to give you an idea of what the development looks like. These are some images of some of the other uses in the area, including the multifamily and commercial uses that are across the street, across Lakewood. As part of this request, in every SUP and a zone change, we always send letters to all the property owners within 200 feet. To date, we haven't received any responses in favor or in support of the request. Essentially, we received some general inquiries, but that was essentially it. So the conditions for approval of a specific use permit are the same ones that we look at whenever we're reviewing a zone change. Those are outlined on the screen. I won't go into the details unless the council wants to, but I wanted to have them listed here just for discussion purposes. This request was heard by the Planning and Zoning Commission on September 26th, where they recommended to approve the specific use permit unanimously with the hours that are outlined in the request. And so the options for the council include approving the specific use permit as presented and as recommended by the Planning and Zoning Commission. The council can approve it with additional conditions if necessary, or you can deny the specific use permit. Grant, the applicant, is in attendance if the council should have any questions. And with that, I'll conclude staff's presentation. So any questions from the council or
Any
for the
questions
applicant?
before public comment? Okay. Any public comment regarding the specific use permit request? Okay. Any comments from council? Okay. Do I have a motion on 6C?
I make a motion that we approve the SUP as presented.
Okay. Have a second. Thank you. Any discussion? Those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, same sign. All right. Thank you, ma'am. We'll move to 6D. We'll close that public hearing. We'll open a public hearing to consider a request for a zone change from A, agriculture, to R4 multifamily for approximately 15 acres, being lots 10A and 12 of City Block 50, generally located at the southwest corner of West Austin and Pearl Street. This request has been submitted by 2 Prepaid Communication Services, LLC, case number ZON 2022-08. City Planner.
All right, thank you, Mayor. Excuse me. Before we get into the item, I do want to remind the council that tonight's discussion is about land use, not a specific project. The applicant has provided a preliminary concept plan for discussion purposes, and there's been a lot of discussion about the improvements that have been shown on the plan, including access and open space and things like that. But this is not a specific use permit. It's not a planned development district where a concept plan gets approved as part of the ordinance. It's straight zoning. So just wanted to remind the council that the question before you this evening is agricultural uses more appropriate for this property, or are multifamily uses more appropriate for this property? So just wanted to clarify that because there's been a lot of discussion about the concept plan that was provided. Also, the request has been modified slightly. Initially, the applicant was proposing a zone change for all of the 15 acres based on the concerns heard from the Planning and Zoning Commission and some of the residents in the area. They have opted to reduce the boundaries of that zone change to just that area that's outside of the 100-year floodplain. It's about 8.5 acres. Essentially, it reduces the multifamily in half. And so the portion of the property outside of the 100-year floodplain would be multifamily, and the remainder would remain agricultural zoning. And so that limits the density and also limits the improvements that can be made on the property. So just wanted to clarify that, and we'll talk about it more as we get into the presentation. But so the request has been modified. All right, so again, the property is zoned ag, and when you look at the zoning map and some of the land uses in the area, property to the east side of Pearl Street is developed with a mix of different residential uses and includes single-family, duplex, and some multifamily structures. To the south is an apartment complex that was built back in the late 70s and 80s. To the west is the railroad, and across that is just generally undeveloped area. And then to the north, across West Austin, is also primarily undeveloped, and then there's some residential mixed in as you travel east. And so just wanted to provide some background information on kind of the mix of land uses and zoning that's in the area. At the Planning and Zoning Commission meeting, there were specific concerns not only about the floodplain, but about potential traffic impacts that the development may have, and why a traffic impact analysis wasn't provided at the zone change process. So I just want to talk a little bit about that. So traffic impact analysis is essentially a study that looks at a specific development and then the adjacent roadway network and looks at what kind of impact that development will have on that roadway network, and then will recommend changes or improvements to the roadway depending on what the impact is. So the larger, more dense the development, typically the more improvements that you see made to the roadway to accommodate that development. In this regard, we don't know what the specific final count will be. The applicant has provided a concept plan and they provided some preliminary numbers, but until they get into the site design, those numbers could very likely change. So when we get a building permit, if the zone change is approved and we get a building permit, they'll have a specific number. And based on that number, typically it's over 70 apartment units, then a traffic impact analysis will be required. And basically it'll be a study that will show, based on that number, what kind of traffic impacts will occur on West Dawson Street, some of the other local streets, and then at that time it'll propose any improvements if necessary. So I just wanted to provide some background information, and that's what we told the Planning and Zoning Commission too. Any questions about the traffic impact analysis or any of that? No?
Well, go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead.
The cost of the traffic analysis, who pays for that?
The developer.
Developer? And who is that with TxDOT or is that with the city?
So the person who prepares the actual study is typically a civil engineer, and they'll submit that to the city, and the city will review that in conjunction with TxDOT. So it'll be a joint review.
Okay, the civil engineer is provided by the owner?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
And I have a follow-up to that.
Yes, ma'am.
You said that after the analysis is done or assessment is done, that then based on the results of that, we consider improvements. Who pays for, what improvements are you talking about and who pays for those?
So for an example, the intersection of West Austin Street and Pearl is just a 4-way stop sign. And so if it was a large development, then the study may say that intersection needs to be upgraded to a signal light, or that there may need to be a deceleration lane added to West Austin Street, or it could be a number of things in order to mitigate additional traffic if it's going to be a big impact. So those are kind of off-site improvements to the actual roadway that would help alleviate any major impacts. Does that answer your question?
Yes, and who pays for it? The city?
The developer. But it also has to be proportionate to the development. So essentially, those impacts are directly related, or those improvements are directly related to the impacts and the size of the development.
Okay, and as long as they're directly related, the developer pays for it?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Typically. Yeah.
Has he been made aware of this?
Yes.
Thank you.
All right. Any other before I move on? All right. Excuse me. So the future land use map does designate this area as rural. In rural, the rural future land use designation is typically for tracts that are include widely scattered homesteads that are forested, or include natural features such as Bonita Creek. So this area is designated as rural, largely in part to Bonita Creek and the large floodplain. And so looking at that, the land use makes sense. When you look at the land use policies and goals and objectives, this would further achieve some of those land use policies, including growth inward, which essentially is infill growth wherever it's appropriate, so wherever it's compatible and wherever infrastructure already exists. This would also achieve one of the goals of avoiding undesirable outcomes, and essentially by coordinating this development with natural areas. So by reducing the zone change to just those limits outside of the floodplain, we feel that also furthers the land use policies of kind of preserving open space and protecting those natural features. There is a comp plan letter in the packet. So our ordinance actually states that if a zone change request differs from the future land use plan, that they're required to provide a letter explaining why the map should be amended. It doesn't mean that we have to amend the map. It just means that they have to provide a letter. So that's why you see the letter in the packet. That being said, I do just want to remind the council, because we don't hear these types of requests a lot, that future land use map is a visual guide to help look at kind of what the intended development pattern in an area is. The comprehensive plan actually specifically states that because multifamily is so market driven, it's difficult to depict on a generalized map. And so a multifamily request could still receive favorable recommendations if it meets all the other policies and land use goals of the comprehensive plan with direction from the Planning and Zoning Commission and City Council. So just wanted to just remind the council of some of those items that are in the comprehensive plan, because that was a question at Planning and Zoning Commission too. Any questions about that? All right. So these are some character images. I'm sorry, Kathleen.
I'll ask my question.
Okay.
But thank you for that letter. That's
You're
a nice
welcome.
thing.
Yes. We had to draft that, so we're still, if you have any recommendations, let us know. We're still tweaking it. These are some site photos. So this is actually just some photos of the property. You can see it's very rural. There's an existing home, but it's been vacant. And so it's just a large pasture, essentially. These are photos taken at the intersection. So you're looking you're looking east and west from the intersection of Pearl and West Austin. These are some character images of some of the development at the intersection. So you've got some multifamily across the street, and then some single family right there on the corner on the same side of West Austin that the subject property is located. These are some images of some of the existing multifamily that's located south of the subject property along Pearl. And again, these were built back in the 70s and 80s. So you will see that they do look older, because they are. And this area hasn't seen a lot of redevelopment or reinvestment in a number of years. Again, these are just some additional photos. The one in the upper left-hand corner gives some more character photos of some of the existing single family in the area. And there's a cell tower on the property too. So as part of our notification process, we sent 18 letters to property owners within the 200-foot buffer. We did receive 2 written letters of opposition. We also sent out 67 notices to property owners within 500 feet. They were also invited to a neighborhood meeting, which we did have a neighborhood meeting, and most of those people who attended were from the Austin Hills subdivision just to the west. And then you also received a number of emails and letters in your packet. There are about 5. Those were people that weren't in that notification area, but just have interest in Bonita Creek and had specific concerns about protecting that floodplain. And we feel like that's been achieved with the recommendation of the Planning and Zoning Commission. This is just a map, and I'm highlighting the properties that were in the 200-foot buffer area. These are the conditions for approval. I won't go into detail unless we get into the discussion, but just wanted to have them listed here. Again, the Planning and Zoning Commission heard this item on September 26th, and they did recommend to approve the request, but to limit the R4 to just that property outside of the 100-year floodplain, which is about 8.5 acres, and for the rest to remain as ag. So City Council can approve the R4 as recommended by the Planning and Zoning Commission. You can also approve the entire tract for R4, or you can deny the zone change. So there's some options. I just wanted to put those on the screen as we get into the discussion. And that really concludes staff's presentation. I know there's some people in attendance who would like to speak. The applicant is also in attendance if the council should have any questions of him. But at this time, I'll open it up for more questions from the council. Yes, ma'am.
The one question I have that you haven't answered already is about the ponding and drainage and I know I don't know if we have enough ordinances about drainage. I don't know if that property. I'm glad to see that it's been amended to build outside of the 100-year floodplain. But what about the rest of the drainage? Are there concerns?
So our drainage ordinance is essentially a flooding mitigation ordinance, and so it's meant to mitigate flooding. And so there is a threshold for the development where they'll more than likely have to provide on-site detention to store water runoff onto the property and allow it to slowly release so they're not flooding their neighbors. I believe I can let Steve Bartlett address that more in detail if you want to get into the weeds, but I know enough to make me dangerous. So it would be the same.
Mr. Bartlett. It's always dangerous.
Yes.
So.
You want?
I'll
let the expert speak.
I know there was ponding in that area, and a couple people asked me about that, so I'm not sure what we're going to do.
Steve Bartlett, City Engineer, Director of Public Works. As Elena kind of opened up with you, we don't have a design. So we don't know what the drainage, what the runoff, and so the concept plan is just exactly what we have. So to really answer your question, we have a full ordinance, a full drainage ordinance that requires them to manage their drainage. And in this case, they will certainly trigger the minimum area that requires stormwater detention. They'll provide us an engineer sealed design for that and the discharge of that. So We don't get the permit until we get all that resolved and worked out. So I have all
So all
confidence that that's fine.
Okay, so all that'll be taken care of.
Has to be taken care of before they ever go to permit, correct?
Appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Any other questions before public comment?
Oh, were you going to come back and ask?
Yes.
Well, I mean,
Before or after, your choice.
well, let me just ask one question. The area that's basically been modified as far as recommendation, and that's the
I'm going to just go at the
outside
map.
the
for reference.
floodplain.
Yes.
As to where, if there is a structure built there, now inside the floodplain, even though the ownership is still there, can they do anything like lay parking lot, etc.?
No, it's very limited. So essentially, anything that's built to support that land use also has to be zoned for that land use. So we wouldn't allow parking lot for the multifamily on property that's not zoned multifamily. There are like two things they could build. Like they could build a tennis court that's not lit, and maybe like a pool house if they have a pool. But other than that,
Playground
they-
for kids.
not even that.
Is that right?
So technically private recreational uses aren't allowed if it's not zoned for that, with the exception of the tennis court for some reason and the pool house. I'm not sure. But beyond that, it's very limited on what they could do. So their detention would have to be in the multifamily area. Parking, I mean, essentially the entire development would be zoned multifamily outside of that 100-year floodplain.
But the tennis court would be associated with the property, though, right?
Yes, and really, I think when you look at that ordinance, it could be one of those things that stands alone as like a recreational use, but because it's listed, and the applicant doesn't have any intentions on doing that, I think they really wanted more of an active use, but because it was a question, I just went ahead and looked it up. So those are really the only two things.
With any activities going beyond that's on the floodplain has to be come back again and get a permit, right?
Yes, unless it complied with the agricultural zoning district, right? So there's a lot of things that ag allows. Agricultural district allows schools, it allows churches. You could build a pig farm, in ag. There's a lot of different things that are also allowed by right in ag. So if they were wanting to do something different that still fell under that land use chart, then they could do that too.
Thank you.
I know pig farm is extreme. I just wanted to use an example. So agricultural farming uses are allowed. Pig, that's the first thing that comes to mind is a pig farm.
Is there like an example that you can give us that's would be relevant to an apartment complex?
Yeah, so like a school, a church, a civic use, a public kind of institutional use, something like that, but nothing really private except for a church.
Okay.
Any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
Just a couple, and I'll save some for later. Is there a drawing? I couldn't figure it out. Is there a drawing
Yes,
that you provided that shows the floodplain in relation to the entire parcel?
Yes. So this is their preliminary concept plan. This is an actual preliminary survey that they've provided. So you see the existing house that's sitting there, and that heavy blue line that I've drawn, that's the 100-year floodplain.
Okay.
And so we look at their concept plan, some of those improvements would have to shift. And so it really limits, what they can do. So where you see that parking, there would be no parking. Where you see the detention, there'd be no detention. It would all be shifted east. So this is kind of a preliminary survey to show you that heavy. Now the FEMA map is, it depicts it. It's not exact. So they'll have a full survey that's underway now, and our floodplain administrator, who's also the city engineer, will sign off on that to make sure it's all it all follows FEMA and it's correct. So this is a representation. It's approximate, but it's pretty close.
Okay. And then my other question that I wanted to just ask real quick is it's an enforcement question, because I'm trying to wrap my brain around if we're not like subdividing the parcel of land, and so I'm just trying to figure out how we're rezoning part of it and not the other part, and how we're going to be able to enforce that.
Yeah, so any improvements have to be permitted by the city, and so whenever they submit their permitting plans, they'll show that floodplain line, and we won't permit any construction for the multifamily development outside of that area. And, I mean, even residential structures have to get a permit. Even barns have to get a permit. So that's our kind of enforcement tool for ensuring that there's no improvements that are made that aren't allowed.
Let me jump in there. Council member, there is a complication with a partial zone on a zone that's not following parcel lines, because many of our performance standards are tagged to the property line, not the zone line. So that will be a nuance that will get played out in the permitting process. And I can't guarantee how that's going to turn out, although I have seen this developer bend over backwards to avoid the issues. So I suspect he's going to present plans that don't raise those issues, but there is that possible gap. And you asked the question, so I needed to tell you that.
Thank you. I mean, it's kind of a squishy answer then.
Well, yes,
Yeah.
it's a squishy spot.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Thank you.
Okay, have public comment? Okay, Chad, you good?
All right.
Anyone want to speak to this?
Well, good afternoon, Mr. Mayor, City Council members. I am Ron Collins, 1827 York Drive, Nacogdoches, Texas, and I am here today to encourage you to support the respective zone change from A to R4 to allow ultimately for construction and build of an upcoming apartment project at the corner of East Austin and Pearl. Now, this apartment building is not the first, and it should not be the last for us in Nacogdoches, especially if we're successful in our efforts to grow in our city. I encourage you to be for this zone change based on the following reasons. We have to increase housing in Nacogdoches if we want to prepare for growth in our city. This is one way to do that. Knowing everyone is unable to afford to buy a single-family home, and even if they are, it is a common theme of our next generations to rent versus to buy. Many really desire for a community-type approach to their living rather than single-family. There are many successful apartment projects near the proposed site. Traffic should not be a problem based on current low usage of the main traffic arteries involved. But after hearing things tonight, I assume that there will be a traffic study required. So that even lends more to that case of that not being a worry. It is a modest-sized project, 80 to 100 units, 2 and 3 bedrooms. That's a good size and will accommodate families if needed. It provides tax revenue to our city that we very much need. The project possesses no restrictions of income or any other required support, making it fully available for all those in Nacogdoches. So I'm asking you to please vote for the zone change. I thank you for your time, and I would work to the work that you do to make Nacogdoches better. I'm going to add one little caveat to that after hearing some of the information tonight. I kind of feel like it's short-sighted in some ways, shooting ourselves almost in the foot not to at least consider the allowance of them to be able to put parking in that flood zone area. Not the floodway, but the flood zone. I think it makes some sense to have that versus and have more than adequate parking, let's just say, if desired. It seems to be, to me, that very little, if any, effect from drainage or other things of that nature for that to be parking lot. I know it would speed things up a little bit, I suppose. It could be argued by the city engineer or others whether or not it would have any major adverse effect. But it does seem like that it allows for there to be additional service from the facility to parking if needed. And you never know, what your mix is on all the customers or that type of thing. So more is better, in my opinion. If we had the ability to do that, I would certainly be in favor of that as well, and ask for you to consider that. And that's pretty much everything I have. Yes, sir, Mr. Bolton.
During the Planning and Zone Committee meeting, it was stated about housing. There was an issue with housing.
Yes, sir.
But it was stated that we had enough multi-families, but not enough single families. What would be your thought on that?
You know, it all depends, I think, if you have an attitude of growth in Nacogdoches. And certainly we've got various factors that are out there today that would promote additional growth in our city. I think significantly with I-69 coming, potentially what changes may occur at SFA, that we might see major growth in those areas. If we have industry come to town, those type of things are going to put a lot of pressure on the existing homes that we have, or residences that we have, whether they be apartments or 1 to 4 family, or single family dwellings or anything like that. So there's going to be a lot of pressure, or could be, if we're successful. The more successful we are, the more residential space that we're going to have. Now, some of the realtors could tell you a lot more than me, but I think that we probably are still short on apartments, that we can still have a lot more of those. I think the trend is that way. As I said before, we have a lot of the younger generation. They're really not into, having a single-family residence where they have to go out and mow the yard and do all the upkeep and the maintenance and everything. They'd rather call somebody to handle all that for them. And I get it. I mean, I own some apartments myself, and I have really good tenants. But I do think they enjoy calling me from time to time and asking me to do things for them and get things fixed and mow the grass and do all those kind of things, which I do. But in any event, that's my thought about that. Did I answer your question?
Yes, thank you very much.
Okay.
All right. We appreciate you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Council.
Anyone else? Yes, ma'am.
Brandy Cartwright. Do you need my address?
No, ma'am.
2806 North Pecan Street.
Either way.
Okay. Have you heard the term NIMBY before? It stands for Not in My Backyard. And in 2007, Harvard did a study about this growing ideology, and I feel like I hear it a lot in Nacogdoches, especially for projects like this. I live just a half a mile from where this site would be. I bike and walk all around in that neighborhood. And I became interested in this particular case because some of the property is on the floodplain right on Bonita Creek. And as a park advocate and someone on the Downtown Action Committee for the comprehensive plan, I have an interest in the Bonita Creek Trail and so that it can be completed someday and we can have an awesome loop around our city, because it would be amazing. So I was really concerned when I saw notices that somebody wanted to build right there. So I started watching, and I watched a bunch of the planning and zoning things or meetings, and I appreciate our citizens who are watching out for our creeks, and I appreciate that the staff and the planning and zoning board took the time to come up with this other option for this property, one that I hope will be easier to be consistent with once our new comprehensive plan is complete and we can update some of our zoning laws to protect our floodplains and waterways. But I think that that it's important that we have new apartment structures in Nacogdoches. I live in the neighborhood by the Plant Center. I have friends all in that area, and there are a lot of student renters there because it's close to the university. This isn't that much further away. And I think that I don't normally have a problem with student renters in my neighborhood. Like I like students. But there are lots of single family homes that are used for students that could be used for single families. And I have a friend who lives on one of the streets who he is one of 2 people who is owner occupied on his street. And they often have 7, students at a house across the street. So just from a personal perspective, I think it shows that we probably do need some more apartments closer to the university. Now, will this apartment complex fix all of the, housing problems we have in Nacogdoches. Of course not. We need more multifamily housing options that can be owner occupied, like condos and townhomes, not just renters. But I think this is a start. I also saw that the developer was fine with the suggested option, and also indicated he would, give easements to the trail to the city. If that ever, hopefully, when that happens. So maybe he'll give it as a write-off in the future. So I hope that we can move from this not in my backyard mentality to a yes in my backyard growth-focused mentality that will help people be able to afford housing as students and while they're entry-level employees.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
Well, I'm Sammy Smith. I really love Saturday morning because I get to go to the mailbox and get my local newspaper. I did this past Saturday, and with my age, I worry about my heart sometimes, and it like it got me when I read that article, and I saw 3 10-story apartment buildings to be built, and I'm like, what? Then I thought about our poor chief, Kip, and his fire brigade as to what he was going to think about fighting fire in 10-story apartment complexes. Then I discovered, thank you, Councilman Bellinger, that was a typo, which I really thought there's no way it was going to be 10-story apartment complexes. But at any rate, what I understand now is we've got 10 units of 3-story apartments. But I tend to agree with my neighbor, Mr. Collins, that we probably could use some more apartment complexes in Nacogdoches. But this one has got problems in the location. I go through that intersection quite often, at least 3 or 4 times a week. I know there's a floodplain down there, and they're not going to build in the floodplain. But you people are all aware that roofs and parking lots do not absorb water. They create runoff. They create a lot of runoff. Where is the runoff going to go from this complex? It's going right into Bonita Creek. Now, would you like to go stand on the bridge on Power Street where Bonita goes under the street after we've had like a 10-inch rainfall? I've seen it, and you guys have too. It floods, and this is going to create more flood water. Now, I haven't seen any data that is going to tell us what impact this is going to be on the environment of runoff water. I think it's a very poor location to try to build a complex like this because of the environmental impact. And I don't see any data that shows what the impact is going to be. Now, y'all correct me if I'm wrong, but apparently the vote on this, if you vote for turn it into an R1, or I'm sorry, an R4, then it's going to be on the city, Steve, and I don't know who else, to approve a building permit. And I assume at some point somebody's going to do an environmental impact study before a building permit gets. Now, you could stop it right now by not voting to change it from ag use to R4, or maybe you could negate it a little bit by voting to change only part of it to R4, but make sure that whatever decision you make is not going to create a major environmental impact. I have, through working on the appeals board for the appraisal district, which has been a fun job, by the way. Not really. Have got to, and then I've been here and seen all the stuff that's going on with the plant shed. Somebody made a mistake somewhere, but they went in, they built it. The runoff rainfall is pouring into the neighbors. Now, where I got into it is they're all coming down and appealing their property values because my property values has gone down. Plant shed because, hey, now I got to do all this work, and the neighbors because now I can't do anything with my property because they got all this runoff rainfall. Somebody needs to do a very close environmental impact study on this project, and I can't see that it's been done. Anyway, that's enough. Secondary, it does create a little bit of a traffic problem because I said I drive through that intersection and drive West Austin at least 3 or 4 times a week, and it is they do have some traffic problems on that. Talk to the police, and they patrol it quite often because of the speed limit and some of the traffic created by the apartments that are up there on the top of Austin Hill or across from the development of Austin Hill. And I noticed something yesterday that I hadn't seen before. I've never seen any skid marks from drifting, if you know what drifting is, until yesterday, or Saturday rather. I drove through the intersection of West Austin and Old Tyler Road, and somebody has been down there in the intersection drifting a lot. If you don't believe me, we'll go down there and look at the skid marks. I don't know whether it will create a traffic problem or not, but it is going to increase the traffic flow. So I think you got 2 problems. One's major, considering the environmental impact of the runoff, and 2, considering the impact of the traffic problem. Now, y'all got to make the decision. I can't make it for you.
Thank you, sir. Anyone else? Yes, ma'am.
Hello, Mr. Mayor, council members. I'm Olivia Kritzy. I'm the owner and broker of Loblolly Properties here in Nacogdoches, and I'm happy to chat with you today, encouraging you to vote in favor of this project. And while my conversation may not be as eloquently written as Mr. Collins, I have some notes here I'm going to try to get through for you here. So a couple of things I just wanted to mention. One, I've been in the multifamily industry for 23 years, and I'm still in the multifamily industry, and I worked in an apartment complex, managed an apartment complex, and at one point was granted the ability to oversee up to 2,000 units. So I'm very familiar with apartment complexes, specifically in Nacogdoches. I got to visit with Mr. Smith this last week during a protest for an apartment complex, so very comfortable with that conversation. As far as real estate goes, I do serve on our real estate board and have done that for some time, both at the local, state, and national level for some committees. This last month of August, so that would be our typical turnover month in Nacogdoches, I do a market survey every month because that's just what I'm used to doing because I've been doing it for 23 months. We had an 88% occupancy in apartments in general. Okay, the apartments that you would expect to get an average occupancy level from. And that's something we haven't seen in a while because of COVID, right? Our students, they just went away. And our remote learning and everything like that went away. And so actually our occupancy rates had been a little low, and it was really exciting to see them at 88% during a turnover period. So they're a little bit lower during turnover, right, because you have them empty during make ready and things like that. They are increasing, and the projection is a 95% vacancy rate, and a 95% vacancy rate is what we call a healthy market in multifamily and the rental industry, okay? We want 95%. If we're at 100%, then our rents are too high. It's totally normal. You'd see it all over the nation. Any realtor would tell you that, multifamily specialist. So we're where we need to be. On the flip side, in real estate in general, it's no secret that people are moving here like crazy right now. You know, we hope they move to Beaumont or somewhere else if they're coming from, you know, other places, but they come here. And I'll tell you that today, for sure today, I was driving around visiting Jasper Board of Realtors and having a speech there, and I came from Tyler yesterday. But today alone, I told 5 families that I have nowhere to rent to them, and they said, we don't know where we're going to go, and I recommended them to Airbnbs, and 3 of them are definitely renting long-term rentals and Airbnbs because there's no apartments available that will hold their families. We have a lot of 1-bedrooms available, but we don't have 2 and 3 bedrooms available, and we have people that want to move here, and we have people that want to build here, and people who want to just stay here and see if this is where they want to move, and they have nowhere to live on a temporary basis. And often temporary basis to a tenant means 1 year, 2 year, which is your typical rental cycle that you would expect. Okay, so is there a need for this? Absolutely. To kind of touch on that area, this is a vacant property, agriculturally zoned property, but to an everyday developer, a single family, for instance, yes, we need more single family homes, but whenever you look at that property, because of the grade of the land, and yes, runoff and things like that, this is not the most ideal place to develop a single family area, and also not for commercial and businesses either, mostly because of the roadways. Multifamily makes a lot of sense, and if you kind of want to just go in your mind and map out Nacogdoches, think about where you see apartment complexes. Think about University Drive in Whisper Oaks, University Hill, Sunridge. Those areas are all built in interesting graded areas. Even Magnolia used to be Wood Forest. All of those places, this is the type of business plan that can develop in areas like that. So to have someone who's willing to take that risk and make that move in our community, I think is a gift to us, or not necessarily a gift, but something that we should look at as, oh, cool, the right kind of business model, the right kind of living space for the right topography. I think it matches very well, and if you want to go drive by those apartment complexes, you'll see exactly what I'm saying. Specifically, Whisper Oaks Apartments is a really good example of a negative grade. And yes, it grades back into a creek also, and that is something that you have to consider, water runoff, especially coming off of roofs and parking lots. However, I think the problem at Power Street, and that's my personal opinion, has to do not necessarily with the water runoff there, but it's something that's farther down that needs to be tended to. And we saw that same thing with Lenana Creek a long time ago, and I'm sure the city can attest to that. People that work with the city can attest to, just some clearing out and such that needs to happen a little farther down. But it's probably something that needs to happen anyways, right? Traffic impact, just to touch on that real briefly. We're talking about 72 units. So I'm sure not all of you have worked in apartments for 23 years, so you probably can't have the same conversation. But off the top of my head, just kind of trying to make notes while I'm sitting here, Northeast Hill is a really good example of a property that has about 72 units. It's on Chimney Rock, residential neighborhood, comes out on Star, two-way road. Okay. Northview Condos has 75, 78 units. North and Burroughs. Okay, Burroughs, residential street, runs next to North Street Church of Christ. North Street, they can come out there. Most of them don't because they don't like to turn left on North Street. So they use Burroughs right there. Bonita Creek Apartments, Heritage Arms Apartments at the end of West College, similar type area. That's a total of 72 units together with 40 and 24, or 36 and 24, something like that. Social House, Lakewood, and North Street, another similar sized apartment complex. So is that going to cause mass traffic? No, because if you think about driving down Lakewood, you think about driving down Star, you think about driving down College Street next to Starbucks, Pearl Street, there's no dire traffic impact there. And matter of factly, I would argue that on Austin and Pearl right there, you have a four-way, Austin's extension, and there may even be ample space for additional traffic. So I feel like that argument may be a little moot. I would agree with Mr. Collins that an extension of a parking lot into the flood plain, not the floodway, or the floodway, not the floodplain, sorry, get my words confused here though, may be an appropriate conversation and thought. I have all the confidence that Mr. Bartlett is going to be diligent in making sure there's a proper retention pond and things like that. But if you go to University Park, for instance, right across Pearl Street, if you walk with me across across Austin Street, you have a little pasture, you have a house, and then you have University Park that grades down. It was an apartment complex built in the 80s that's used as individual condos. That they have a back parking lot that's not sufficient for their area, and often you see people parking across the street at other apartment complexes. So I do think it would be helpful to have parking there. I'm not saying that it won't be sufficient. I'm sure there's plenty of space to meet guidelines by the city, but we need to be forward in our thinking, right? So you don't want to build for today, you want to build for the future. So I would argue that may be a conversation that needs to happen. Also, that area, of course, is all surrounded by multifamily R4, so it is in synchronicity and harmony with the surrounding area, and I think it makes the most sense. And seeing that we do not have a market saturation problem right now with housing, multifamily housing, that it is appropriate. I would also say that we had the same similar conversations and arguments whenever the Hyder estate was developed, and we did the legends and then the lofts. The lofts, of course, being built down near the creek. We have not seen a significant environmental impact from those units, and those were very large units with a lot of concrete, both on the Hyder estate and down below. So for all those reasons, I would ask you to vote for this project, and I appreciate your time and can answer any questions if you have any.
Thank you. We appreciate you.
Mayor and Council, Scott Boyer, 61 Waterford Circle. I could pretty much tear up my notes because I'm pretty sure Ron and Olivia covered everything I was going to say. So I'm going to speak more specifically, Mr. Bolden, to a comment or a question that you had for Ron. To me, it is about the future, and I know you've got a lot to think about in this, and you've got a lot more details than all of us in this room combined on these projects. And we, in the end, we're going to trust your judgment to make the right call. One of the things, though, I think we got to look at it. I hope you look at it with economic development at least on your mind, and that's really what I'm here to open up, I guess, the discussion with. And Mr. Bolden, you mentioned, do we need those houses now? And I think, like it's been said, it's something that we do need, but I think it's something we're really going to need. We look at projects. I'm the vice chair of NEDCO right now, and one of the big things that people are looking at, industries and major employers when they come here, is what is your availability of housing if we bring these jobs to town? And there's no question that we've lost out on some opportunities because of our limitations there. And we're some ongoing discussions right now with a couple of real solid opportunities that are going to bring a lot of jobs to town if we can get those projects. It's a huge concern of mine, and I know others in this room, that if we don't have those options, we're missing those opportunities, and we're seeing firsthand those go to other places like Longview or Lufkin or Tyler or other places because we literally don't have places for them to be. And this isn't about college housing or anything like that. To me, it's about if it's the hospital bringing in a new executive or one of our major employers or SFA with new faculty with a family of having a place for them. And we just don't have that right now. Seeming enough of it, and as we continue to grow and seek those opportunities for growth, I think it's important that we look at this and support it and create those opportunities. And I'd kind of end, Ms. Fisher, with the squishy part. I would just leave you that I imagined 10 months ago talking about having a whole bunch of big rigs on the brick streets was probably a little squishy. And sometimes you just got to have a little faith in the people that are putting the thing together and making the plans. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay, Council. Any comments or questions or?
I just have some thoughts, not any questions. I do think we really do need to protect our creeks. We have to, speaking of squishy, we really have to watch out for drainage. And we also need property development, and I'm hopeful that the comprehensive plan will address all those, because those are serious things that we have to have ordinances, and we have to really think about how we address those. But I'm hopeful we'll do that in the comprehensive plan. I do think this is an appropriate place to build because it actually has R4 occupied housing. It's not something that's just grandfathered, zoned something, but there are apartments around there. I am hopeful that some of these issues can be addressed in the permitting process, just to be careful that we really do watch out for protecting our creek and having good drainage. And I am so impressed that the developer worked with the Planning and Zoning Commission to protect the 100-year floodplain, and I just really commend you all for doing that. And I'm ready to make a motion whenever it's ready, but other people
Let him,
may.
okay.
Sure.
Anybody else want to talk? I mean,
Yes.
Mr. Boland?
No. Go ahead.
Okay. I have a couple of questions and a couple comments. Thank you, Olivia. It was really helpful to hear that data. Besides the, I think the 11.4% vacancy cited in the materials, I didn't really see any hard data. I know that we've commissioned as part of the comprehensive plan a housing study, and I know that council has demonstrated interest in getting at least preliminary numbers on that, so we can have some idea of where we are when we're making these big zoning decisions right before we have the comprehensive plan completed. And so in going through all these materials, I was something that I struggled with because in a vacuum, 11.4% doesn't really, vacancy rate doesn't really mean that much. So thank you for your data on that. I just think that we need to establish, especially for the implementation of the new comprehensive plan, which has been, a hot topic for months now. We need to establish a commitment to what the comprehensive plan says about zoning and about land use in all of the chapters, not just in the land use chapter. And I think that if we're going to vary from it, then we have to have a really good reason for that. And a good reason isn't a vague statement on housing need. So I don't know where my brain would be right now if not for Olivia's helpful comments about providing more data on the need for these particular types of apartments. I want to recognize and applaud the Planning and Zoning Commission for being proactive and creative in finding a solution to this issue. And I just want to put on record that I'm really grateful for the work. I think that they put a lot of work into it, and I'm really grateful for that. I'm really grateful to the applicant for being open to it. I know that was a big shift in your plan, so thank you. And this was work done after the staff recommendation was to move forward even in the floodplain. So I want to thank P&Z for that. Question about the environmental impact, whether there's going to be a study when something like that happens, when, in your opinion, it's called for.
So, I'll speak to it, and if I don't answer your question, I'll call on my expert city engineer to come answer it in more detail. So, when we talk about environmental studies, that's different from detention or simply floodplain mitigation. Usually, in the context that I've heard that spoken about, it's really looking at the types of runoff, not the actual runoff, but the types of runoff that are coming off buildings, contaminants, things of that sort. And so this is not an industrial use where they're storing fuel tanks in the ground, or they're going to have a lot of chemicals or things that could cause a lot of pollutants into that area. So typically, I don't think we would expect to have an environmental study for this type of land use. Steve, you look like you want to make a comment.
So the term environmental study is a term of art that triggers a federal statute, which in order to do that, you have to have some kind of action that requires federal action, like a permit that's being issued for a discharge or some kind of environmental impact. Apartment complexes don't trigger federal environmental permits, so there's not going to be an environmental study required for this kind of development. The drainage is an environmental impact, and there is a drainage component that is required from our development standards, but there's not an environmental impact required under our code, and there's nothing in the statutes that would trigger that for this project.
Okay. That makes sense. So I don't mean the term of art triggering federal. I mean more what you mentioned, the drainage, the effect on maybe potential erosion and just negative impact on the creeks, given that it's in the floodplain.
So the negative impact on the creek from drainage or erosion, that is dealt with in our ordinances. The impact to the water quality in the creek is not.
How does our ordinance deal with that? Ordinances deal with what you...
It doesn't.
It doesn't.
I'm not asking about the water quality. I'm asking about the erosion and the...
Oh, yes, okay. So as part of any development, whether that's commercial, single-family subdivisions, multifamily, if you have a development that exceeds 14,000 square feet in impervious area, that means rooftops, parking, anything essentially that's not dirt, you have to provide drainage analysis and on-site detention. And essentially, anything over that threshold, you have to create a system that stores that water runoff and then holds it so that it can slowly release and not just overwhelm the system by dramatically increasing the water level to a way that it would negatively impact the adjacent properties. So that is part of the permitting package that will be submitted. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does.
You're saying retention ponds?
Retention, detention, is essentially detention detains and then lets release. A retention pond actually has a permanent surface level, and oftentimes you'll see developers use that as like a decorative amenity, but it's not required. It could be retention or detention. But essentially they both serve the same function. They hold the water and slowly release it so that it's not flooding the neighbors or the adjacent properties.
Thank you.
I took a lot of notes, so I want to make sure that I don't get mad at myself later if I forget something. One of the things that I was thinking about, I mean, I recognize and understand better now that there's a need for this particular kind of apartment housing. And I know that generally we have a housing need in Nacogdoches, right? But we haven't had hard numbers to back to back that up. In my brain, I've been balancing that with, you know, the fact that we're months out from having this comprehensive plan completed and hopefully adopted and start moving into an implementation phase. And I've just wondered what the resulting new comp plan would say about these areas so close to the creeks, and whether it would envision instead potential for a trail. And that's really what I've been wrestling with. And this isn't a question really, it's just a comment. I know that in the 2010 floodplain study that Commissioner Forbes mentioned in the September 26 P&Z meeting, it discusses a new zoning category called, I think she said it was floodplain greenbelt. I hope that these are all things that we will consider and that will be taken into account in the comprehensive plan. I think it's probably time that we become more intentional about protecting our creeks and our watersheds and environmental preservation really in general. I heard the applicant say in the September 26th meeting make a comment about being happy to grant an easement in the future, and I'm wondering how that would play out legally so it's not contract zoning, which I think was an issue. Repeat my question?
I think I may be able to answer that, actually. You want me to take a stab at it?
Go ahead.
All right. So the Parks and Recreation Master Plan actually calls for a future hike and bike trail along that area. And even if this property wasn't being rezoned or developed, when that time came, we would approach that property owner and acquire that easement.
Okay.
And so there's no need to condition the zone change with that because we'll get it. It's just a matter of when. Typically, we don't go to property owners and acquire it until we get into the design phase and we're ready, and so that shouldn't be an issue.
Okay. And I heard you correctly, right? You stated that? Okay. I think that's what I've got.
Okay.
Oh, sure.
Let me just address real quick what Councilmember Fisher was talking about the comp plan. I think just, the comp plan, when it's all said and done, when it's all hopefully adopted by council sometime next year, it's basically a vision document. It'll lay out a series of recommendations. And so again, if environmental impacts or whether it's additional drainage improvement, or drainage mitigation or other needs need to be looked at in the future, because the city has developed over time and it will continue to develop, I think that'll be, again, I'm not saying it will be, but it should be a potential recommendation for the staff and council and respective commission, whether it's planning and zoning commission, eventually council, looks at those studies or commissions some studies to come up with additional recommendations or new ordinances or additional ordinances or beefing up ordinances or amending the existing ones to accommodate some of the concerns that have been mentioned not only tonight by some of the residents but also by the council. So the plan is not going to be the policy. The plan is going to kind of outline kind of what are some of the goals and objectives that this community, this organization should go pursue and come back to council with appropriate recommendations.
Yeah, I understand it. I just, I don't know that in the past the comp plan has been used to actually follow through with policies and ordinances. And so I wanted to explicitly state on the record that, for example, I know that we didn't commission, I think you said, the 2010 floodplain study. I know that was done outside, but regardless, it had several recommendations that were just seemingly totally ignored. And this isn't to place blame. It's just to say that I hope that moving forward with whatever studies and recommendations come from the comp plan process, that we actually do something concrete with it.
Yes, sir.
I guess I'll go last, and I also have a couple of questions. I think one is for sure for Mr. Bartlett, but I want to echo Councilmember Fisher's commentary on the need for us to very carefully look at how we develop near our creeks, and that, from the comprehensive plan standpoint, if we're only following the land use section, if we're only following portions of it, then the recommendations from staff we need to follow the entire comprehensive plan, not just a single chapter. Yeah. From the Planning and Zoning Commission, I want to also echo the other council members to say that the commission did a great job, and I appreciate the developer also. I know that's impacts your bottom line, and your willingness to work with the commission and with the city is commendable. And I definitely thank the P&Z Commission for their work. I know they had postponed that, and they wanted to get additional information, and came to what I think is a good middle ground there. Mr. Bartlett, I just have one question for you. Can you just briefly discuss the difference between floodway, 100-year floodplain, 500-year floodplain, what that really means?
Sure. So the floodplain is the 100-year floodplain first, is the entire area that would receive water during a 100-year storm event, and that's just based on a computer model. The floodway is a portion interior to that is a theoretical line generated by a computer, and it is generated by a model that basically fills the floodplain until such time as the water raises 1 foot. Because when you have a smaller area, the water would get higher. And so fill until it raises 1 foot. And where that line is, a fill, is the floodway. So it's a computer model of how we can fill the floodplain and not have a flooding impact greater than 1 foot. Which you can see it mirrors very much in our requirements for you to build a foot above the flood elevation, because we allow floodplain fill. FEMA allows floodplain fill and tells us exactly how to do it. Now, we in the future could talk about ordinances and changes, and that's a discussion not for this project. But that's the difference. The floodway is basically a no-build area. FEMA restricts it. We restrict it to some very few things. But it is a theoretical area. The 500-year floodplain is the same as the 100-year floodplain, only wider, and it takes a different rainfall event, a 500-year storm, and plugs it in that same creek and looks at how far it floods. There's no regulatory requirements here for 500-year. It's an informational line only. We have nothing that fits that. City of Houston or Harris County, I think, recently adopted new rules that go to the 500-year because I think they saw some 500-year floods from Harvey. But as far as we're concerned, in most cities you would see across East Texas, 100-year floodplains, the metric for what we do. Did that answer your questions?
Yeah. What does a 100-year flood mean?
So a 100-year flood does not mean once every 100 years because I think we get a couple a year. It's basically a 1% chance of happening in any given year. In other words, 1 divided by 100. So it's a 1% chance of occurrence anywhere. A 25-year storm is a 4% chance of occurrence, same kind of math.
So a 500-year would be a 0.2% chance
correct.
of happening
That's
in
correct.
any given year.
That's correct.
Okay. I guess one of the questions that was brought up was from several members of the public was building parking in this 100-year floodplain. So our ordinance, correct me if I'm wrong, requires us to retain or detain the water and not let it out at a greater rate than was existing. Is that correct?
Correct. And so in 1992, we created this drainage ordinance, and it was updated to include the stormwater detention facility for the triggers that my now new engineer assistant, as you heard, she's pretty good at the details, I thought, has told you. And so the nutshell version of that is we want the creek to not see the impact of a development. So the flow rate into the creek generally basically equals the pre-development flow rate. So what they show us when the engineer sends us plans is he develops a hydrograph, a graph of the flows for the existing conditions. Use my hands. The existing conditions that you would see today, the field. And then he develops another graph that shows with the apartments, in this case, in place, what would happen. Well, the flow's going to be higher, and it's going to be faster in time because we have pavement carrying water, not grasslands. And the difference between those curves is the detention volume, and that's what he calculates. Then separately, they pond it, and then they pick a pipe size that's too small to let it all out at once. So it would be like pouring water in a 5-gallon bucket with a 1-gallon bucket, but only having a straw at the outfall. And so it builds up until it can all come out. And that's the theory. The come-out rate is intended to match undeveloped or pre-development conditions. In theory, downstream, nobody sees the development, the impact of the development. Now, there's more water, so there's water in the creek for a longer time, but the flow rate is not any greater than it was before it developed. Does that kind of make sense?
Yes, it does. So theoretically, that is the case.
Yes.
So practically, in reality, we have seen that exact opposite thing with the plant shed, right? It was developed greater standards. It didn't meet that specific use permit. I'm just using that because that's a recent, in my mind, example. So what is our protection for making sure that that's actually developed in that way?
Sure. So 2 things, and I know it's a rabbit trail to go down for our other case, but 2 things. There were already runoff and flood conditions that existed before that. Those folks came in here and had pictures of horrendous runoff before that happened. So after the development occurred, the stormwater detention should have, for that given design storm we use, a 25-year storm in this case, should have not seen any more water. What was explained to you is that system failed. The system was changed, the runoff changed, the whole thing wasn't as planned. And so when this came in front of us, we all said, go back to the drawing board, fix it, replan it so that, in fact, your runoff is either diverted, mitigated, and there's no more runoff than existing. In this case, Mr. Delaney with 215 showed you that he's actually going to trim it just a little bit. So, and as I stood there and told you, I guess, when we spoke, they will still have runoff going onto their properties because they always have, and there will still be an allowable amount, but it will be, in theory, slightly less than it was before the development. In the case of a brand new development where you can just engineer it all perfectly, the discharges of those ponds will be undeveloped flow rate.
Excellent. I think that answers all of my questions.
Okay,
thank you.
Okay. All right.
So I have some other things I wanted to add before if that's okay.
Okay.
So I totally, I don't have questions for you, though you're welcome to.
I just like to stand here.
Okay.
You know?
I totally agree with all of the comments that everybody has made, but I'd like to throw in one more term, and that's watershed. I think the watershed area is part of what we're talking about, and not just drainage. We're talking about that we have two beautiful creeks, Bonita and Lanana, and they are our treasures, and that's part of the reason this land was developed so long ago, because of our two creeks. And we really do want to protect them, not just from flooding, but also we want to protect the wildlife that's in it and around it. And we do want to be intentional. I'm a little concerned about the comprehensive plan. I was thinking that they would directly address it and perhaps give us some example ordinances and give us, okay, that is true. Mr. Canizares.
I can't imagine why they wouldn't. I mean, other cities have done these things, so it just depends on how restrictive you want to be. I mean, if this community wants to be as restrictive as Austin, they can recommend that model. If you want to be less restrictive than what some of your suburban cities and other parts of the state have done, I think it's just a matter of what is the city's threshold on pursuing these types of policies.
The reason I have asked it personally, but we really haven't had discussions about it in the comprehensive plan, and we really, really need those discussions because it is a balancing act. I mean, we can't say all of our property can't be developed to protect both creeks, but we really do need some expert assistance. So I do hope that protection and preservation of two of our greatest assets in the whole city will be covered by the comprehensive plan. But meanwhile, we still have to develop in the city, so that's where I am. But I just wanted to clarify. I want to make sure. I've been to all those Lanana Creek watershed meetings to see all of that. There's a lot of other things other than just drainage involved in all this, and we're all concerned about that. So, and if you want me to, I can make a motion now. But okay, so let's see if I've got this worded correctly. And will you please correct me if I don't? I make the motion that we approve the request for the zone change to R4 for the property outside the 100-year floodplain, as recommended by the Planning and Zoning Commission.
Okay.
That sounds good to me.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Second, Mr. Huckabee. Okay. Any discussion? Those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, same sign. Okay, with that, we'll close the public hearing, and we will move to E, hold a discussion and give staff direction regarding the City of Nacogdoches legislative priorities for the 88th legislative session that begins on January 10th, 2023. City Manager.
Yes, Mayor, members of council, Mario Canizares, City Manager. My comments will be brief. It's really just to introduce Kelly Barnes. Kelly is our liaison between the city and Hillco Partners. He will be here to give you sort of a preview of what's to come in the upcoming legislative session. Also to be able to convey to you all some of the local needs that we have here in Nacogdoches that we would like to obviously advocate for as we go to Austin starting in January of 2023. I can't believe it's already upon us. And with that, I'll turn it over to Kelly Barnes and let him make his presentation. And he has some handouts he can give you as well.
It's the same on the screen, but if you want a hard copy. Good to see you guys. Okay. It's been a little bit. Hope y'all are well. I've got a short presentation that kind of goes over some of the key issues coming up, generally speaking, for the 88th legislative session, and then at the end, more of a discussion of specific issues that the city may be interested in. So we are set to begin the 88th session on January 10th. As you well know, it's 140 days, so we'll end at the end of May. Key dates coming up. Obviously, the election is about, I guess, exactly a month away from today. And 1 week after the election, bill filing begins in the Texas legislature. So before they even gavel in January, people will be filing bills left and right. So that's coming down the pipe and something we monitor on behalf of the city, what comes across. Key issues we're looking at. I'll get into some of these in a little bit in more detail. The budget,
property taxes and appraisal reform, school choice, economic development incentives, school safety, immigration, border security, ERCOT, PUC reform, and then the Texas Sunset Commission. As far as the budget goes, Texas, as you remember, 2 years ago, we were in the pandemic, and we really had dire projections for what the deficit was going to be, and it turned around really quickly, and they ended up having enough money during session. So going into this one, it's the exact opposite. We've got a large surplus. Right now we're projecting about $13.6 billion to be in the rainy day fund, and then $27 billion in terms of surplus for the general revenue budget. So that's quite a large increase. And so to the next point, property taxes and appraisal reform, a lot of the key legislative leaders are talking about what we're going to do on property taxes, and they're hearing that like everyone is you know, the appraisal values are coming out. And so the number one thing they're talking about right now, without any debate, obviously, is making a significant investment in that M&O tax, the maintenance operation of the school district. And that would be obviously a significant savings, depending on how much money they wanted to put into that. Other things going into the session, economic development incentives. So y'all know Chapter 313 agreements are set to expire this December. And that is already being worked on right now of what that new project will look like at the state level, because there was a deal recently in Central Texas. A company was coming and they picked New York over the Central Texas area, and the reason they cited was that the 313 agreement was no longer in place and New York had one. So seeing some real examples of a company going the other direction. School choice, obviously that's garnered a lot of attention. The governor has signaled he is in support of school choice, so that topic will be heavily debated early on in session. School safety, we all know what happened in the tragic situation in Uvalde, and the governor, I think about 2 weeks ago, mentioned that he would put school safety as an emergency item on the legislative agenda. So what that means when it's an emergency item is that you can consider it the first day of session. Normal pieces of legislation you can't talk about in the first 60 days. So he'll normally add somewhere between 5 and 10 items on that emergency list. This is the first one we've heard about. Immigration, border security, obviously statewide polls, that is the number one polling issue consistently in the state, and garnered a lot of the media attention. So that'll be debated, you know, whether it comes to Texas doing more of its on the wall front down there or the busing program. There'll be money talked about at the state level very early on that subject as well. ERCOT PUC reform. We've got a new CEO of ERCOT who just started about a month ago, actually. And so you'll have significant changes. They'll continue to work on really enhancing the grid, is the way I'll say it, this coming session. And also the Public Utility Commission and ERCOT are under sunset review this session. And that's to the next point. So, you know, every state agency goes through sunset every 12 years. And so the key, you know, hot topic ones this session, PUC, TCEQ, the Department of Licensing and Regulation, Texas Water Development Board. So those are the ones you'll see getting a ton of attention. And then you've got ones like the Texas Anatomical Board that people aren't paying attention to. So there's about 30 agencies that'll go through that sunset process. And your state representative, Travis Clardy, is on the sunset panel, so he'll review all those bills before they get to the full House for debate. So staff and I have discussed some local potential issues and feel that this list that I've got here in front of us that I've worked on with Mario and Larissa is a good starting point for discussion for council tonight. I'll run through them really quickly. Supporting local control of revenue and development codes, opposing limits on local budgeting authority and reduction of revenue streams, supporting the city's ability to promote development along the I-69 corridor, expansion of broadband for rural communities, support mechanisms to ensure adequate development of the Central Heights water supply system, oppose unfunded mandates, protect the city's ability to advocate in Austin, protect the city's ability to utilize economic development programs, and support transportation funding, specifically I-69. And I'm happy to talk about, obviously, the specific agenda, which I want you all to ask me any questions about, but any topic, obviously, on your mind from the legislature to what's going on in the state right now. Happy to answer any questions.
Anybody? Ms. Fisher, you look prepared.
Yep, something triggered me. Thanks for being here, and thank you for that. The Nacogdoches legislative agenda, I mean, all those topics sound good to me. Earlier, when you're giving us sort of your projections on what the legislative session is going to look like, you mentioned the busing program. You called it a program, which made it sound more official and what's the word I'm looking for? Instead of just these like one-off busings of humans to different parts of the country being dropped, it sounds like it's becoming maybe something that's going to be like codified or more.
Yeah, so let me clarify. It's not it's an official state program. Obviously, there's nothing in statute. It's the governor using executive power to do what's going on right now. Obviously, it'll be a topic because people are seeing it on the news every day. What's going on, regardless of your opinion about the subject. But what I think you'll see is the legislature consider funding to make that program more robust. Instead of sending 5 buses a week to sending 20 buses a week, is something that'll be talked about. Whether that happens or not, we'll see. But that's what I'm referring to.
Thank you. That's all.
I'm sure I'll have several more questions as we get closer to January. Is there any discussion on, we have significant needs in our revenue. Is there any discussion at all of providing municipalities with funding out of this huge surplus that the state has?
I think everything is on the table right now, and I don't say that lightly. With this much money, the state has not had this kind of surplus, and we've not had a rainy day fund this high. We're going to talk about everything under the sun from, we talk about the Nacogdoches Airport out here. The whole TxDOT fund for airports in the state is $90 million per biennium. They're talking about increasing that to $200 or $300 million. So you're talking about some really large expenditures, and municipal government obviously needing a lot as well. And no question about it, everything's on the table to answer your question.
Well, I guess really, we've been curtailed in how we can tax on the property side. They're talking about doing M&O stuff for school districts, but there's not been any relief for cities on that topic. So if there was a way for us to advocate specifically to say we need help on the M&O side, we need to try and do that, in my opinion.
Yeah, no, it's something we definitely should talk about and put on the legislative agenda as session begins. I think the general appetite, and we've talked about this before, the legislature towards cities. 2 or 3 sessions ago, and last one, there were some things going on that were hurtful to cities, and money aside, right? It's tapered down a little bit. It was everyone wanted to go after Austin because they do something crazy, right? That is tapered down some, but there is still a sentiment among some lawmakers that want to be punitive towards cities, but it's not as strong as it was, if that makes sense.
Yes, sir. Mr. Belden. Thank you, Mayor. One of the things that we should stay focused on is protecting the city ability to advocate in Austin. It's getting, they are trying to take over city business in Austin. But one of the other things, I know it doesn't seem like it's city business, but the school choice. And I always looked at the school choice as economic development, because I'm not sure, but in my opinion, when you're looking at private school, you're taking away from school district. And correct me if I'm wrong, but do they take away funding? Depends on the amount of students that's in the school district, but they don't count private schools in that, correct?
The proposal is not written yet, so they can craft anything they want to. Obviously, the note I put in there is that obviously the governor signaled support for the general idea. Mm-hmm. I'll say, but the House of Representatives is not enthusiastic about the program. So all that to say is, when you're not seeing really good details at this point, it tells you a lot of maybe how likely something is to pass or not, because we'd be getting into the nuts and bolts of the program, and we're not right now. That's not to say nothing can't happen, but
well, one of the elements of economic development to me is, and in the past in growing communities, growing cities, is how well your school district performs, and that brings businesses, or it brings families to your community because of school district, especially if they rate it very high in academics, football. But
yeah,
thank you.
Yeah, no, you're right. No question about it.
Just two short. I believe that I've heard some discussion of using the surplus to make sure we have a robust broadband everywhere. Is that correct? So
That is correct, and was interesting as we talked earlier during the pandemic. The state was not going to have a lot of money, and then things started to change pretty quickly. They weren't going to put very much money into the broadband office at the comptroller's office. They were going to create it and put a little bit of money for staffing and get to it another day. They ended up putting a significant amount of money into it, but there's no question that if you're going to build out this statewide infrastructure, it's billions and billions of dollars. And they wanted to see how much federal drawdown money was going to come first. So now that's kind of reaching a climax. But yes, to answer your question.
Okay, so of course for rural communities, that's a huge
right.
issue, and that would be a huge benefit to really see that. So you know that better than I do.
No, and Senator Nichols, obviously, your senator has passed that legislation, and there'll be tweaks to it this session that he'll write the legislation for, and so you've got a really good advocate on the broadband issue.
Right. So, and I know that's part of what this legislative agenda is, and that's great. The other question I had is, I know there's federal dollars for infrastructure in these aging old towns. Any possibility of having some of that excess, huge, big Christmas dollars for maybe the oldest town in Texas having infrastructure? Maybe it could be, the legislation could be crafted that the older the city, the more the money.
I like that idea.
Yeah.
We'll see what we can do.
I'm just tossing that out for y'all.
Yeah, no, that's good.
I'm surprised Larissa didn't already come up with it.
We actually had that conversation with Senator Nichols here about a month ago, and the answer was not real favorable.
But you don't know till you know. But anyway,
we
can ask again.
You got to ask.
Yeah,
You got to ask.
again.
That's right.
Go for it. Put it. Maybe we can put it on that agenda. Seriously, just throw it in one more. Anyway, I'm always hopeful.
We'll always see, and I think at some point I'll let staff speak of bringing something more formal than obviously just my bullet point list for you.
Well, thank you very much.
Yeah, Kelly, we really appreciate what you do for us and advocate for us. We know you got a strong voice, so thank you.
Happy to do it. It's fun to work for you guys, and I appreciate the opportunity. So.
Yes, sir.
So, Mayor, again, tonight was just to kind of give you through the overview and get your input to see if there's something missing that we didn't pick up or left off, whatever the case may be. And so what we would like to do, either your next meeting or the meeting after, is to kind of bring you sort of a formal resolution that adopts these as your legislative agenda going forward. We will then obviously send those to our state delegation so they have that, and so Mr. Barnes, through him, can have it. We'll also pass it on to NISD, SFA, the county, so we kind of are all singing at least from the same hymnal when it comes to what the priorities are, because many of these things obviously fall right hand in glove with our local entities here in Nacogdoches.
And your agenda goes to, obviously to your state rep and state senator, but other members of the legislature will see this and look at it and compare with other cities. So, it's not just going to Representative Clardy and Senator Nichols, just tell you guys, obviously. So.
All right, we appreciate you.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for being
yes,
here.
Sir.
Okay, and that concludes our agenda, I believe. So we're adjourned.